right, so welcome everyone to a deep dive that I think is going to leave everyone kind of scratching their heads and asking, what just happened? We've been following the Syrian civil war pretty closely, I'd say.
Oh, for years.
Yeah, and things have taken, well, let's just say an interesting turn.
Yeah.
After years of fighting, with Russia right there with him, President Assad has up and vanished, gone, and his family right along with him.
Yeah, it really is quite the mystery. To think about it, his family's been in power for decades, ruling Syria with, well, let's just say not the gentlest touch.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, rebel forces take Damascus and, well, no Assad. It's a massive power shift, and everyone is kind of just, sitting here watching, wondering what happens next.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the article we're diving into today comes in. It's in the Tribune. It's called Assad and Family Granted Asylum in Moscow After Deal on Military Bases. So, what do you think? Escape, strategic retreat, something even crazier?
Well, the article says that Russia has granted asylum to Assad and his family on humanitarian grounds.
Humanitarian grounds. For a guy accused of, well, some pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
That's where things get interesting.
Right.
So, maybe not a simple escape then. What are the implications here of granting asylum in a case like this? It feels like a pretty big move by Russia.
It is. Granting asylum, it's like a shield, in a way.
Oh, okay.
It could protect Assad from being prosecuted, for anything, especially by, the international court or something.
Yeah.
Basically, Russia's saying he's under our protection now. But, and here's where it gets even more interesting, the article also mentions a deal. A deal to ensure the safety of Russia's military bases in Syria.
Hold on. So, Russia might be offering protection, but in exchange for something. What's so important about these bases?
You're catching on quick. Remember all the talk about those two Russian installations, the Smymim Air Base and the Tartus Naval Facility?
Yeah.
Those aren't just any old bases. Those are Russia's powerhouses in the region. Hymim's like their air traffic control for the Middle East. Lets them, flex their military muscles whenever they need to. And Tartus. It's their only repair shop, their pit stop in the Mediterranean. Vital for their navy and all those, Russian contractors working down in Africa.
So losing those bases would be a huge problem for Russia. This is starting to feel less like an escape and more like a high-stakes poker game. What do you think they're putting on the table in this deal? What's Russia's end game here?
That is the million-ruble question, isn't it?
Right.
One possibility is they've basically said, you get safety, we get our bases. But Russia, you got to remember, they've always been playing the long game in that region. Right. They're not just thinking about bases. They want to keep their influence, which means potentially, shaping the future of Syria to benefit them.
Speaking of shaping the future, there was this really powerful photo in the article, Syrian Americans celebrating Assad's, his exit. It really brings home the human side of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds us that behind all these, political chess moves, there are real people, real lives that have been through years of conflict, turmoil, you name it. For these Syrian Americans, Assad leaving is deeply personal. They've watched their homeland just torn apart, their families scattered, their culture threatened. The fact that they're celebrating, it's really a testament to how much this war has cost, on a human level.
It's a really stark reminder that this isn't just some geopolitical game. It's about the lives of millions of Syrians who have endured, just unimaginable hardship. And now with Assad gone, they're facing a future that's still incredibly uncertain.
Exactly. #TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-1208, part 2 of 3.
Okay, so Assad's out of the picture. Does that mean, the war is over? Or is this just the beginning of a whole new mess?
Well, that's the big question, right? It's not so simple. See, the Syrian opposition, they're not exactly a united front. It's more like, a patchwork of different groups.
Okay.
And each one has its own, ideas about what should happen next.
Right.
Some are more moderate. Some are, let's just say they lean a little more extreme. And even with Assad as the common enemy, they haven't always gotten along.
Okay, so a patchwork of groups, some more extreme than others. What does that even mean for their ability to actually, govern the country, assuming Assad's really gone for good?
Well, imagine you're trying to make a quilt, right?
Yeah.
But everyone wants to use their own fabric and their own pattern.
Right.
You might get a beautiful tapestry or the whole thing could just fall apart. That's kind of the challenge facing Syria right now. Can these groups who've been fighting each other as much as they fought Assad, can they actually come together and, create a stable government?
Honestly, it sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And where does Russia fit into all of this? I mean, they've been pushing this peaceful transition narrative,
Mhm.
but what does that even look like to them? A government that just, plays nice with Russia? Are they trying to put a puppet regime in place?
Now you're thinking like a true deep dive detective. See, Russia's playing a very smart game here. It's not just about those bases, it's about staying in control, keeping their power in the region. Think about it. They've put a lot of resources into Syria, military support, money, you name it. They're not going to just let all that go to waste.
So, yeah, they probably want a government that's, friendly to their interests.
Mm.
But what happens if these rebel groups can't get it together? What if this whole peaceful transition just blows up?
Then things could get really messy. I mean, we could see more fighting, maybe even a power struggle that pulls in other countries from the region. It's a powder keg, and one wrong spark, and the whole thing could explode.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a minute.
Okay.
Let's say, hypothetically, that somehow, some way, these rebel groups actually manage to form a government that's, I don't know, somewhat stable. What then? I mean, what does it even look like to rebuild a country that's been just ravaged by war for years?
Imagine trying to rebuild a house after a hurricane. You've
Yeah.
got the structural damage, the roof's gone, the basement's flooded.
Yeah.
But it's more than just the physical stuff, right? It's about rebuilding lives, communities, trust. In Syria's case, that's a monumental task. The infrastructure's in ruins, the economy's shattered, millions of people are displaced, either within Syria or as refugees, scattered all over the world.
It's heartbreaking, It's easy to lose sight of the human cost when we're talking about, all these geopolitical strategies and who's got the upper hand and all that.
It really is, and it's not just the physical rebuilding. There are also the psychological scars, the trauma from the war, the families that have been torn apart, the lost generations. Those wounds run deep, and healing them, it's going to take time, resources, and a whole lot of compassion.
Compassion, that's a good word. Where does the international community fit into all this? I mean, can countries like the U.S. or those in Europe actually make a difference? Or are they just going to, stand back and watch things unfold?
Well, they've been pretty hands-off so far, mainly providing humanitarian aid, but not really getting directly involved militarily. Now, with Assad gone, there is a chance for them to, step up and play a more active role in, helping create a peaceful and stable Syria.
So what does that actually look like? Are we talking about sending in peacekeepers,
Yeah.
bankrolling the entire rebuilding process? Like, what's the plan?
It's going to take a multi-pronged approach. Financial aid will be essential, to rebuild infrastructure, provide basic services, get the economy going again. Diplomatic efforts will be key to encourage cooperation between the different to, create a regional environment that's conducive to peace. And yes, in some cases, peacekeeping forces might be necessary, just to keep things in order and prevent more violence. But it's not just about throwing money and soldiers at the problem.
Right.
It's about working with the Syrian people, understanding what they need, supporting their vision for the future of their country.
And what about all those millions of Syrians who had to flee their homes? I mean, what happens to them if peace actually does happen? Can they ever go back?
That's another huge piece of this whole puzzle. Many of those refugees have been living in limbo for years, in camps or temporary settlements, separated from family, unsure about their future. If they do return, they'll face the daunting task of rebuilding their lives, often in places that have been completely transformed by the war.
It's hard to even imagine, the resilience it would take to go back to a place that's been so deeply scarred by conflict.
It really is. And that's why the international community has a moral obligation to help them, not just with the immediate humanitarian aid, but also with long-term support for resettlement and reintegration. We can't just, pat ourselves on the back for achieving peace and then forget about the millions who were displaced and lost everything because of the war.
So we've got this incredibly complex situation, a fractured opposition, this power vacuum, a country that's been devastated, millions of refugees, and all these international actors with their own agendas. It's kind of overwhelming.
It is. It's a real tangled web. But with all the chaos and uncertainty, there's one thing we can't forget: the human dimension. At the end of the day, this isn't just about political games or who's got the most power. It's about real people, real lives, who deserve peace, security, and a chance to rebuild their lives. Hashtag TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-1208, part 3 of 3.
It's really easy to get caught up in all the geopolitical stuff.
Yeah,
But, you're right. This is about the Syrian people,
absolutely.
their lives, their futures, their hope for a country that's just been, well, shattered.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, is there anything we can actually do as, individuals? It feels so big, so far away.
I get that. It's easy to feel that way, but even small actions, they can really make a difference. Think about it like this. You're a deep dive listener, which means you're already, ahead of the curve.
Right.
You're informed, you're engaged, you're thinking critically about these complex issues. That's a really powerful starting point.
Okay, so what can we, the informed and engaged listeners, actually
Yeah.
do? Like, give us something concrete here. What are the actionable steps?
Well, first off, let's talk about awareness. Don't just let the headlines, dictate your understanding of what's going on.
Mhm.
Dig deeper, do your own research, look for different perspectives, different opinions, challenge the narratives that you're being fed. The more you know, the better equipped you are to actually, advocate for real change.
Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
But how do we translate that knowledge into action?
Well, you can use your voice. Amplify the voices of the Syrian people. Contact your elected officials, the people who represent you. Urge them to support policies that put diplomacy, humanitarian aid, refugee resettlement, all of that front and center. Talk to your friends, your family. Share what you've learned. Post about it online. Start conversations. Challenge misconceptions. Raise awareness about what's really happening over there.
So, okay, be informed citizens, advocate for change.
Yeah.
But are there more tangible ways to help?
Absolutely. Remember, all those organizations, the ones actually doing the work on the ground, providing relief to people affected by this conflict, they rely on, well, us, on individuals. Even a small donation, it can make a huge difference. We're talking food, shelter, medical care, education, things that people desperately need.
It's a good point. Sometimes the most impactful actions are the simplest ones, the most direct ones.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the money, is it?
No, it's also about empathy. Make an effort to understand what Syrian refugees are going through.
Yeah.
Listen to their stories. Help them share their voices. In a world where there's so much, division, so much indifference, choosing empathy, choosing compassion, that's a powerful thing.
So even with all the political stuff going on, all the maneuvering, there are ways for us, for everyday people to make a difference. It's kind of empowering to realize that we're not powerless.
Exactly. And the Syrian conflict, it's a reminder of how fragile peace is, how interconnected our world is, and how much even our individual actions matter. We can't predict what's going to happen in Syria.
Right.
But one thing's for sure, the path forward, it depends on the choices we make now, both individually and as a global community.
We started this whole deep dive with this mystery, really.
Mhm.
Assad's sudden disappearance. We've uncovered some clues, looked at things from all angles, thought about the potential consequences. But, even now, as we're wrapping up, the biggest question is still out there. What happens next? And that's a story that's still being written.
And we as informed, engaged citizens, we have a role to play in shaping that story.
So stay tuned, stay informed, and stay engaged. The future of Syria, in a lot of ways, depends on it. Till next time, keep diving deep.